I'll just introduce myself a little bit, and I'm actually down in a place called Nannup at the moment, which is 3 hours south of Perth. The Noongar people, to the Noongar people, this is the place to stop at. So I'm stopping here at the moment, and I'll be speaking with Stephen Ma today around some of his work. So just quickly, my name's Chris Darmody. I work as a psychologist with some narrative ideas. I incorporate a lot of narrative ideas in with nature and have done a fair bit of work in that space. I've invited Stephen to talk with me today because I heard Stephen talk last year around some of the works that he was doing in a prison setting. I was quite inspired. Steve doesn't have any formalized narrative training that I know of. However, I could really feel some narrative flavors coming through the work he was doing, and hearing people talk about the traditional owners and the narrative work that's come through their work. I could really get a sense that Steve was doing something similar in the work he was doing in prison. So I want to just have a conversation with him around that today. I'd also thought I'd take an opportunity just to talk about some of what's happening in Western Australia with narrative, because I really feel like we're starting to have quite a large movement towards narrative therapy, with all the major universities offering training within the university degrees they do here. We have a lot of people coming through the Dulwich Centre doing the master's program down there, and our proximity to that, as well as the stuff Ian's doing. And we'll ride the wave to Ian a little bit later, I believe. But yeah, I think there's some really exciting stuff happening over here in the West, and hearing the guys talk about NT there, I can definitely relate to sometimes feeling like you're separate to the rest of Australia. Our borders are open over here. Our life is generally continuing in a fairly normal way, normal-ish. But yeah, we do hear a lot of news coming from the east, and that kind of dominates our airways a little bit. Yeah, so Ian and are you stepping in as well, Ian, or is it me just interviewing Stephen alone? How does this work?
I was thinking that you might start with Stephen, and then we can go from Petrina, and I'll then join in at the second half, if that's okay with you.
Yep, sounds great. Sounds great. So, Stephen, are you there?
Yeah, I am. Hi, Chris. How you going?
G'day. Thank you for joining us. Yeah. So you're up in Perth, yeah?
Yes, we're here. I'm in Perth. Yeah, beautiful sunny day today.
Yeah, I know. Big storm coming tomorrow, though, I hear.
Yes.
All right, so Stephen, maybe it would help just to start if you could explain a little bit about the context of your work and where we're positioning you. So,
okay, yeah. So I work in the prison setting, and my job is to run programs in the prison, drug and alcohol programs, and I've been doing that for about 7 years now. And I guess last year, as you mentioned a bit earlier, I was asked to just share a bit about what I do. And, you know, having been a relatively new sort of counsellor, practitioner, working in a prison setting was quite daunting at first, and not knowing what to expect, apart from what one might have watched on television and the like. And so entering the prison system and actually being in the room with 10 or 12 other men and listening to their stories, it reformed and reshaped my my whole appreciation for not only what it's meant to be, what's it like being in prison, but just what's it like being a human being. And we the program that I ran, or that I'm still running, is worked out of a workbook, and it's a 3-month-long program, 2 days a week. And so there's a lot of exercises to do, and it's fairly cognitive. And I found that after having done the program a number of times, that it's difficult really reaching, if you like, a person's core belief and their true narrative. So I guess being a prisoner, or being sent to prison, you've had to have had a fairly committed lifestyle, if you like. You've got to be fairly committed to what you were doing in a consistent manner for many years in order to be given a prison sentence. And so that's the narrative that I think a lot of prisoners have, a lot of people who are in prison carry with themselves. And I did come across a few videos that were mainly from the US prison system, and being able to, I guess, re-story your life from a different perspective, from one's own perspective, rather than being told by the police officer, the judge, the prison officer, who you are and what you are or not capable of, and being able to do it from your own language. I was surprised just how powerful that was for the guys that were doing it, and and so that's been, I guess, that's been incorporated into the program that we're presenting, and we're asking the guys to reflect on what they're learning in their own language, and also to maybe write some of the main highlights of the whole program is to write a letter to your younger self. And
so Stephen, before you go there, so this is something that you added into the program, was it, or is it something that was already part of it?
No, something that we added to the program, yes.
Yeah, and there were, I mean, from your perspective, is it worth just talking a little bit about some of the issues that you saw with the cognitive-based program that you kind of expected to run?
Yep. I guess it's we're asking people to make changes, and learning a new skill is in part what CBT is about. You present a new scenario, you get people to think of why they do things, and what your thoughts, your feelings, and then your actions. Okay, but I think it presented as I saw people that were doing really well in the program, so they were very engaged and they did all their worksheets really well, and then to my surprise, that a year or two later, I met them again in prison, and then I would ask them. I said, "Oh, so what went wrong, and what happened, and why are you back?" And as those conversations developed, it appeared to me that whilst there's a concept, there's a cognitive idea of what I should be doing or should be changing in my life, I felt that the idea of internalize it, would that be the right expression, but making it one's own and making it one's new narrative, if you like. I don't think that was quite evident in the program. That didn't quite help people grasp that idea. All these skills were meant to help you redefine who you are, or define who you really are for the first time, maybe. Yes.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess there's issues with power within what's happening, because if they're not doing this program, that they can, not apply for parole and these sorts of things. Is that?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So unfortunately, the program is structured in such a way whereby you are mandated to come onto the program, and if you do not attend the program, then you do not you're not eligible. Well, you may not get parole, and you most likely will not get parole. Yes.
And so So what I have witnessed from some of the stuff I've heard you say before is this real privileging of the people within the program's voice that was potentially not there. More of a kind of do these worksheets and this will correct your identity, you know, from a correctional facility.
Yeah, absolutely. I just felt like we were ticking boxes, and you know, and once you've been in prison once and twice, and by the fifth time, you know, you're quite a pro at being in prison. You know what box to tick and how to tick it, and so, you know, people reoffend, and you come to prison 10 times, you know, over 20 years, and I just couldn't for the life of me understand how that was missed. Like, you know, we're not rehabilitating anyone. It's a revolving door policy that, and I know it's very complicated. You know, it's not a simple, straightforward put one program in, but I would say, like in the West Australian system, for example, if you commit a crime that is linked with alcohol or drug use, and let's say you're selling drugs, so you're high up there in rather than just taking drugs, and you're selling drugs, and you're being convicted of the possession and sale of drugs, you may get let's say a 5-year sentence, and of the 5-year sentence, you're offered at best a 3-month program within 5 years. So we're all in lockdown now, or we were in lockdown. So just want everyone to imagine that you're spending 5 years in lockdown, and all you get is 3 months of learning, I guess, or trying to understand, why am I in lockdown? Why can't I go out? Why won't they let me go out? You know, to work through all that frustration. But we'll give you 3 months of program, and 3 months of program is 2 days a week. So it's a 100-hour program, and I just feel like, you know, whilst it's great when people are on the program, they love it. As soon as the program is over, then the benefits from the program start to wane over time, and by the time they are released, it's practically back to normal.
Yeah, and so you know, I guess it's a bit of a risk that you're taking in adapting the program. Is that okay to say? But what do you find?
Being on here talking about it,
yeah, being recorded and on here talking about it. But what would you say it's made possible? I mean, because I've heard you talk about it being a very, you know, a program that's made in America, and we're bringing this into you know, Australian prisons, you know, and not really matching language or needs. But what do you think it's made possible? Well, what's made possible when you're privileging these people's own words?
Sorry, let me understand your question again. Can you?
Yeah, okay. Well, it might be worth as well talking about maybe some of the adaptations that you have made. What are some things that you've added?
Okay. Well, look, I've had the so there's a program manual, and it's 300 pages long, and it's written 20 years ago. This is what we're currently using. This is the standard. This is the gold standard of what we're doing in WA prisons to help rehabilitate drug and alcohol offenders. And so 300 pages, and this is meant for everyone. So whether you're up north and you may be in it, like we had people speaking about Aboriginal culture a bit earlier, and you may not be able to read and write, or you may have a university degree, and then, you know, you could understand this whole book. So this is a one-size-fits-all program. And we felt that anyone who's done a program before would then be able to go through this book, and you could practically just tick through it. And there isn't, you don't really, you could fly under the radar, basically. I think that was the problem. So we introduced a diary. So it's just we added a diary to the program, whereby you were asked to reflect on whatever that was shared during the day on the program, and we try to I guess ask questions as well in the diary, like, you know, maybe a simple question like, you know, how do you feel your life would be if you never took drugs again? Now, you know, for someone who's only known to have taken drugs, it's a bit like you and I saying, you know, what's it like for you and I if we are now gonna commit ourselves to a life of burglary and crime? How do you feel about that?
Mm.
And so these are very, you know, like, it's almost unfathomable for most people for us to say, well, I don't know what's it going to be like, you know, like to be a professional criminal. And so this is exactly what we're asking people in prison to do. We're asking them to be something to be a professional, pro-social person. And it just dawned on me that there's no sense of language, there's no sense of awareness of what that really entails, except that it's written in these books and I know which answers to answer, and then I'll just tick them as we go along. So the hope was that the diary, the letters that they write, helps them sort of connect a little bit more with basically with how to go about getting a life that they want for themselves.
In their words, as opposed to the evidence-based cognitive workbooks words. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, and I'm not saying that the books are not, you know, the books are useful for, you know, for a variety.
Yeah.
Absolutely, they are useful. But I think and I didn't know this until after we did all this, and, you know, having spoken to you, that, you know, the narrative in these workbooks and in the writings, you know, probably comes under narrative therapy, I guess, and that's something that I wasn't particularly trained in that area. I sort of came from Murdoch, the person your approach and all that. Yeah.
I guess it comes from narrative ideas. I mean, those questions you're asking, you know, are not throwaway questions. They're quite can be quite intense to ask someone. You're right. You're asking what would it be like for them to change their entire personality.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. That I felt really frustrating, because the main focus, the emphasis was, well, you know, a person leaving prison needs to have a house to live in. They need to have a job to go to, maybe transportation to get around, you know, and they've missed the entire point, is that, you know, that those aren't the fundamental problems of why people offend in the first place. It really has to do with, you know, how they see themselves, you know, they're misfit in society, and how they, you know, they need to reorientate their whole thinking around, you know, who they are and how they can fit in society. They are a part of, you know, this whole, you know, we are in this together, you know.
Yeah.
And
so that's where we talk. So that's where we'd say identity failure. So the idea, I guess, that you're already in a system like that suggests that you have a failure within yourself. You failed at some way or something. And if they're not getting to the crux of that, no wonder people are repeating the behaviors.
Yeah, that's right. You're basically in a narrative that says, you know, you'll be back, and I think that's the main narrative.
Yeah. And so, Steve, I think you have an example, do you, of a letter that was written, or?
Yep, I've so over time, and some people have offered, you know, I've de-identified anyone that's here, but I just want to share some flavor of what a person who's some of the letters that they've written for themselves or written to others. And so here's a chap that's written a letter to his younger self, and he says, look, and he's speaking to his younger self. He says, I've come to warn you of the mistakes you will make. You should never ever started smoking weed with your friends, as it becomes not only an addiction, but a pathway to harder drugs. It didn't cost you just money, but instead it will cost you your family, friends, and the love of your life. When you get accepted to go to rehab, you should have gone. You should have never glorified selling drugs to yourself or pursued it as a full-time career. You should have trusted your family more than yourself when you said to yourself to stop using and selling drugs. You have never believed drugs was the only path for you. You should have spent more time with your family and in your family instead of so-called friends who were only hanging around for drugs. You should have pursued your dreams of buying and selling drugs. Working in the motor trade is something you enjoyed and should have pursued. So did I read it right? You should have pursued your dreams of buying and selling shares. I apologize. And working in the motor trade is something you enjoy and should pursue. Family and working hard is what should be important to you while living a drug-free life. If you don't listen to this advice in this letter, you will lose everything you ever loved and valued, including yourself, and one day your freedom.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's his recommendations to his earlier self. So we're talking preferred storylines there. Yeah, wow.
And just for someone to be able to put that down in writing, and quite often what we do is everyone gets a chance to read this out in the group, and it's moving. You know, it's moving. It's a tearjerker. It's a very it feels like it's a first time experience for many people to really be asked to speak this way about how they would like it to have been. So they go back to the beginning to try and restory and reorder. Look, this is what how I can see it as well, rather than just people telling them what they should or shouldn't be doing.
Absolutely.
We had a situation, I guess, have I got a minute here?
Yeah.
So we had a situation in one program where we had one particular younger person in the program that was still very committed to being to living a criminal lifestyle, if you like. And I thought, well, there were a number of older people who have been in the system for quite some time, and so we said, look, why don't we do some letter writing, and if anyone would like to write a letter and give it to the younger member of the group for him to have a read. And I initially thought no one would bother doing it, and I was stunned in that I had about almost a 75% response rate of people writing, and there were some really heartfelt letters, going into the pages, and it really just said to me, like, it may help the person who's younger reading it, but I think the person who's writing it, would have been such a moment in one's life, to be giving advice, the same advice I need to also follow myself, but to be writing that out on paper and to be sharing it with someone else, it feels like it's a journey of ownership, that I'm now, not just, I'm sort of trying to walk the walk, rather than not. So I'll just quickly just read. I'll just quickly read that, and just let me know when time's up. So this guy says, mate, just writing a few lines to you to see how you're going in jail these days. I don't know what your attitude in jail is, mate. I hope it's not one that I had when I was young, at your age, because I have wasted all those years in jail, because my attitude was that I don't care. I think I've heard you say that a few times. But anyway, I'm not trying to judge you, but guess what? You have the power in your mind to think more about the future. I wish I could turn back the clock and get all them years back, what I've spent in jail. And I think my years in jail add up to about 30 years in and out of prison, which I can never get back. So what a waste of my life it has been. But I still have hope always for a better future. But I have got to change my thinking and my attitude. So, mate, I hope that while you are still young, that you and only you can make better and right choices to better yourself for your future. And I mean that, mate. You still have your own destiny in your hands. So I hope you put more value on your life as a person, a family member. And remember, your life is as valuable as anyone's. So think about your life before it's too late.
So yeah, so what you're saying, just with the time we have left, so the person writing that, that would have been quite I guess a catalogue of their life a little bit, and their hopes and their, but also they're able to pass that on to someone younger in the hope that they can avoid those mistakes that they've made.
Absolutely. And I felt that for people that participated in this, that they really got stuck into engaging with the reflection, with the letter writing, they then engage a lot more with, pre-release programs and also post-release planning and how they're going to manage themselves as they get out. It becomes it gives them more motivation, I guess, to be able to do that. And I've seen that they're far more motivated and far more willing to engage in helping themselves as well. And it's just a way of saying, look, you are a good person. You've made mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. And if we want people to leave prison and not return to prison, then we need to identify that there is goodness within them, and this is, I think, the stories that they're writing about their lives and about their hopes and aspirations as well for others and for themselves is one way of helping them reprogram, I guess, the way they see themselves.
Yeah. Great, Stephen. I mean, that's probably a perfect place for us to end it off and send this wave further along the country. But no, thank you very much for sharing those stories of hope, of those stories of change. And thank you for not only coming here, but making the effort to take a chance with some of those opportunities.
No worries, Chris. Yeah, for sure.
No.
Well, cheers.
Thank you. And how do I go about this? We send our wave to Petrina and Ian. Is that what happens?
I got your wave.
You got my wave. Here it is. All right, I'm going to step out. Is that what I do? Yeah.
Yeah. You can. So thanks so much, Chris and Stephen. Really inspiring work, and look forward to hearing more about it too as time goes on. Please do. I want to introduce Petrina, who's a mental health social worker and currently working in private practice in grassroots homelessness support service. And she has a side interest in disaster management and mental health. Her work has been, I guess, as it is for most of us, has been an ongoing journey of being alongside people in a range of settings, including out-of-home care, family support, schools, training, and policy areas. We've actually known each other for quite some time. I started to think back, and then I thought, if I started adding the numbers up, something happened, so I didn't go any further. But quite some time we've known each other, and our paths crossed in a very powerful and meaningful way when Petrina was working as a torture and trauma counsellor on Christmas Island from 2012 to 2014. At that time, the island had a detention centre for asylum seekers and refugees, a federal government prison for people who had committed no crime in seeking asylum. Her work gave Petrina an opportunity to bear witness to the intense distress people experienced under those conditions, and the extraordinary courage as well of people who were unjustly incarcerated. And so I invited Petrina to come and talk. I've heard her talk before on this, and I know that there's some words here that I hope that you will all find very inspiring, and to get a sense of some of the work that her and Pauline Lee achieved on Christmas Island. Oh, just before we go there, I want to say hello to Ariane and to Lynn Rosen. Hi, great to have you with us. So, Petrina, did you want to add anything to my little intro?
Not really. I guess we're going to go into exploring what that actually looked like and what was happening there in more detail. But I guess an important part of our work together was that you had the role as my supervisor while I was working on Christmas Island. And so that just gave such insight into not only the work we're doing, but the narrative perspective into that. So
that was my privilege. I was invited in, and I immediately said yes, because I just thought this is a very unusual circumstance that we were all involved in. And it immediately spoke to me of, well, if I can make a little bit of contribution, then I will. And so I much appreciated that invitation.
Yeah, absolutely. And my reflections on that time there is one of the most, powerful areas I've ever worked in terms of the people that we got to meet and the work that we were trying to do and the context that we were working in.
Could you, just thinking about the context, could you say a little bit about the work, or why you decided to do the work on Christmas Island?
As anything, it came out of a kind of a story and a shift in terms of our family at that time. My husband had just recently trained as a teacher as a second career, and we were looking at this idea of being able to be somewhere else where he could be a teacher and we could just experience something different. And so he started looking to a job on the island at the same time as his other job as a torture and trauma counsellor came up. And I had a little bit of background in working with asylum seekers when for a year I was in Dublin in Ireland and worked with unaccompanied minors. So that was children under 18 who had arrived without any guardians. So I already had an interest in this area. So when that job came up, it just seemed to make sense to look into it for Christmas Island. Little did I know what I was getting myself into. But the island in itself was, enough to make us want to go, because it was, it's this, I call it an island of contradictions, because it's this beautiful, amazing tropical island with, the experiences you can have as a person just living there were incredible. In terms of the closeness to nature and all the things you could experience, while I was working alongside people who had had every inch of freedom taken away from them, and every hope and dream that they had seemed so unattainable. So it's kind of this real juxtaposition of what my experience of the island was and what theirs were.
Could you give some idea visually of where Christmas Island, just for people who may not know, where it's a sense of that?
Yeah, so it's only a couple of 100 kilometres south of Indonesia. So it's much, much closer to Indonesia. To fly, so the only way to get there is from Perth, and it's about a 4-hour flight from Perth to get to Christmas Island. And that is the only way to get there, and there's only a couple of flights a week. Otherwise, supplies get to the island via a ship that comes every 6 weeks or so. Yeah, so very remote.
Yeah. So remote, a very remote island. So there was some work there that you were already doing in Dublin, I think you said, into the work on Christmas Island. And how did, when you think about the narrative ways of working, how do you think they made a difference to the conversations you were having with people on the island who were detained there?
Yeah. So I guess the first thing for us that I noticed was that what people were experiencing already within detention was certainly being like categorized and diagnosed and all these kind of structures put upon them. So we're very conscious that to work with people, we wanted to be working in a way that was actually understanding their perspective and inviting their ideas around what was happening for them. To even get to see us as the counsellors, they had to have been through a medical service where they were assessed and identified whether or not they needed the counselling. So we wanted to provide a different experience to that. So I guess narrative, you know, enables you to firstly hold some ethics around how you want to work and what grounds you in the way that you approach people and you know, have conversations with people. And then it encourages a curiosity rather than a problem-solving, expert-based approach into working with people.
Yeah, and I remember that we've spoken about this, to create a very welcoming environment that would be into the counselling service in the area where you were, where you had your rooms, to which was actually outside of the detention centre, if I remember. People had to travel outside of the centre itself to see you. That in itself was a stepping out into some kind of freedom experience beyond the walls of the prison. And I do remember you saying that it was creating a room, a welcoming, hospitable environment, so that they could experience something where it was like they were no longer incarcerated, they were no longer seen in a certain way, maybe as they would be through the lens of the government policy, but they were seen as people who you were.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we you know, you and I talked about that being a humanizing process for them to arrive at our office, our space, where firstly we would identify them by name, while within the detention system they were known by the ID number that they were given. So we would consciously choose their name, and then we would take them into our counselling space where there'd be a couch to sit on, and we would offer them a cup of tea in a china cup, which all sounds very, very insignificant until you base it against where that since the moment they'd left wherever they were coming from, they had not sat on a couch and they had not drunk out of a china cup, because everything within detention was plastic and disposable. And so we often found that just even through doing that practice of identifying them by name, introducing ourselves, offering them this very, very basic level of humanness, that people would be already in states of distress because it was so different to what they were getting in detention. Yeah.
Yeah. So a number of things to do that were surrounding or offering people, that were surrounding the counselling itself. In fact, they all blended together, was my sense. Yeah, there wasn't something that was more like, oh, this all fits together in a way to provide the opportunity for people to step into, in some sense, like an alternative view or alternative place where they could experience valuing. And I remember we had this conversation once about renaming the centre, because I think it was called what was it called again? What was the official name?
Oh, I think it's Torture and Trauma Counselling Service or something like that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And then we decided to rename it. Do you recall what we renamed it?
What do we call it? The Centre for Dignity?
Human dignity, I think, is where it got to.
Where injustice is not welcome. I remember.
Yeah, that's right. Centre for Human Dignity, where injustice is not welcome. So we renamed the centre. There wasn't a sign out the front that said that. but we did as much as we could to keep reminding ourselves that that's our centre, and that's what we'll name it. Yeah.
Which I think it fits with that narrative practice around being really, really conscious of the words that we use. And so for me, as a practitioner to work there, to be able to identify yourself outside of this system that was so traumatizing for everyone. So to actually create a name that you could hold on to and understand what that name meant, actually then led into your practice and what you were doing there.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's great. That's a very interesting way of putting it, that idea of the physical space and the naming of the space, and we enter into that space, and our practice is that space, we enter into it and we are in touch with the kinds of values and ethics that we wish to be connected to. And I know that you also found some particular practices helpful. Do you want to talk about some of that? I know there's a lot of that we could talk about, but just some particular things that you found worthwhile in that where you were offering the service there.
Yeah, so if we're thinking about narrative practices, like you're saying, Ian, there's so many that were really valuable in how we were working. But I guess when we've been talking, one that kind of really came up was the idea around the concept of absent but implicit. And I guess because what we were being presented with, how people were kind of coming to us was in this state of really, really heightened despair and hopelessness and distress and maybe even anger and all these things that we were presenting with. But knowing that underlying all that were some really strong values or beliefs that they hold, which they just were struggling to access at that point in time, because I guess what the detention system was doing is taking away their name, their clothes, their belongings, their family, their freedom. So they'd lost so much, and so all they could present with was what their experience was. But we knew underlying all that was a lot of, strong survival skills that have gotten to this point in time already. Yeah, so I guess absent but implicit made sense for a lot of things we're doing.
Can you recall perhaps one or two stories where the absent but implicit was very welcome by the person you were seeing, and what difference it made for them?
Yeah. So I guess examples of this could be really, really kind of what seemed like fairly small ideas or fairly small concepts, but I think the power they held was really good. So an example was there's like an Iraqi man that I was working with who came to me and was describing how he's now refusing any medications, he was refusing to attend medical appointments. And I was aware that any other framework may have described this as a non-compliance, and therefore the response would be to try and, encourage him that his health was important. So therefore he must be doing these things and he can't not attend his medical appointments. But I guess in holding this idea of absent but implicit, it's like, well, why was he not attending these appointments? What was so important that made him make this choice? And so all our conversations with people were through interpreters who were on site. So there's this extra layer of trying to have to ask these really interesting narrative questions in a way that can be translated and understood. So we got through the frustration of trying to make sense of what I was trying to say. And by asking him why was he refusing his medication, well, when he was doing that, what was that saying about him? And he talked about that he didn't own a decision for treatment, that someone else was making that decision. And so by refusing, he felt like he was actually getting a choice around this. And he was being able to show himself and to show others what that choice was. And so then I asked, well, when making that choice, what do you notice from that? And he described feeling victorious. And the reason being is the medical service he perceived as being really unjust. And he didn't want to expose himself to any further injustice by putting himself in that position. And when I asked about this injustice, is the fact that the medical system took away his sense of his own body, that they don't provide any information from test results, they don't provide information about what medication is for. And so it feels like they just take from him and he's not getting anything back from that. And so that conversation then led into ideas around, well, it sounds like justice is really important to you. And so if you're not exposing your body to injustice, what are you doing? And he described that as protecting himself. And it's like, well, if you're protecting it, is it important to you? And he described that, yes, it was. And why is that important? And it's because he valued his body and he valued his health. He needed that to be able to survive what was happening. So then our conversation went in a direction of ideas around what he could do to protect himself from injustice, but also value his body and his health and how that could look and what he could do with that. Which I think goes in a very, very different direction than just saying, well, I think you should go to the doctor. And from that, he came out to his own solutions about other ways he can make choice around injustice instead.
Yeah, right. So going the way you describe that, very, I'm sure it didn't just kind of happen the way you said it, but I imagine there was a slowing down and a carefulness about the questions and really attending to his particular experience in the moment. That was there. Yeah.
And no conversation flows that well, and sometimes you'll think of a question and it won't translate very well, so then you go back again and try and get hold of what you're talking about before to then find a different direction to look at that. Yeah.
Is there another example of someone, Katrina, who you worked with, which would be highlighting this particular way, practice around absent but implicit?
So many of the people that we worked with presented with ideas around not wanting to live any longer, may have had previous suicide attempts. And so that was quite a constant in what we were working with. And I remember one lady I was working with who it was really, really strongly present in her life that she did not want to live anymore. And she had lots of ideas about how she could do that. Initially working with her, my go-to was to try and help convince her that there's reasons that she should be alive and there's reasons not to try and end her life, until I spoke with Ian, who then said, maybe I just need to sit with the distress. And so that is what we did. And it was interesting where that conversation went to from there, because by actually acknowledging what she was experiencing, then we're actually able to talk further around it. And so to try and get a sense of where she was at and what was happening, I actually used some therapeutic cards, which were just symbols, to ask her, to pick out something. I can't remember what it was, but it's something obviously that was apparent to her at that time. And she chose a gravestone image. And so I do remember thinking, going, oh, here we go, we're going to, be talking about dying again. So I asked her what she saw when she saw that card, and it was death. And I said, what comes to mind? And she talks about not suffering anymore and no longer being dependent on others and not wanting to be a burden. And so, and I went, questioned that a bit more, and it came out that for her, it's also about that she's always been independent. So it's very unusual to be so dependent on people giving her her food and her clothes and all this kind of stuff. So then I asked her around, so it sounds like independence and suffering is really important. And she said, yes, it was, and she can't have that here. She can't feel that she's independent here. And the reason she wants to is because her belief system was around that you need to lead a good life and do good things for others. And if you're not doing that, then the world does not mean much. And if you live a good life, there is nothing to fear about death. And so this actually then led into a discussion about what a good life means to her and what it would look like. And which bits were maybe, there's a lot of her sense of that a lot of this wasn't possible in detention. So by identifying some of those values and ideas around good life, we're able to identify things that she maybe was already doing that was part of living a good life within detention, with all the restrictions and constraints that it has. Which again, to me, that just suggested such a different way of talking about where she was at than just sticking with, so don't try and end your life because there must be something more important for you. Yeah.
To me, it's much more expansive and so many more options come in terms of the conversation that may not be there otherwise. And that idea of, and I think this is what you pointed to, and in the work that we've spoken about over those years, Katrina, is discovering and making discoveries and people letting us know about all kinds of ways that they sustained themselves during the years that they were imprisoned. Some remarkable ways of doing that through sustaining culture and rituals, and the fact that they kept on doing them over many years for some people. Was a testament to their determination and courage and really wanting to hold on to whatever they could under those really severe conditions. So I think that's come. I know you've told other stories to me along those lines, and it's almost like they sing. It's like someone singing a song that reminds them of everything that's that is here, even in those conditions, and that could be in the future. So it has hope, tremendous hope in it at those times. Yeah. And I know that we spoke about hope once before, and this idea of having hope dashed many times, and despair taking the place of hope. And I think at one point, maybe if I could just put this part in, we talked about moving beyond the despair hope sort of polarity, because actually having hope wasn't working all that well. Because when people who were in detention decided to have some hope, it looked some possibility that something different could happen. Maybe they could be free under certain conditions, come to the mainland and so on, and then it was taken away. And that happened, you know, more than me, that happened many, many times. So the despair kept coming back. And I remember we had these conversations about moving beyond despair and hope to a place that was called integrity. And it seemed like integrity was a different place to stand. That whether there was despair or whether there was hope, people could stand with integrity and find ways to proceed. Not that it was easy, but at all. But I know it was possible for some people to do that. Can I ask you a couple other questions before we finish?
Yeah, sure.
I think we've got lots of time. We've got another 10 minutes.
Oh, we've got heaps. Yeah.
So, was there a practice, a narrative practice that made a difference to how the work affected you? You know, because you were there for 3 years. It's a very unusual situation, the context. It's constantly changing as the government became more and more committed to cruelty of people who were there. And I'm just wondering how narrative practices may have affected you, sustained you or not at those times.
It certainly did. And I think it's what made it possible to probably stay there and keep working in that situation, I feel, alongside the colleagues that I had at the time who were just amazing. I guess one of the things I became aware of is that I think narrative helped keep me close to the idea around ethics in the work that I was doing. And I know in previous areas I've worked, ethics was something, you know, that you kind of abided by, but it didn't appear to have that much of an influence on how you worked. But I guess narrative helped me be a lot more aware of what ethics I was basing the way I was working on, and which was helping guide me into doing the work that I wanted. And I made a note here of, I think, one of the times that I would have contacted you and said, you know, because it's just got so toxic and so traumatizing, and it's like the reactions that we were getting to the work that we were trying to do to support the people, we were getting a lot of kind of throwback from the systems around what we're doing. And you'd said to me, when you actually get reactions from people, you know that your actions have been ethical, which I found really helpful, that idea that to know that you weren't being, that you're working as close as possible to what was important to you, meant that you often had to then be challenging the things around you, and that there would be a response from that. But that was okay because you were clear around how you wanted to work.
Yeah.
So I think, that there's that part of narrative that had a huge influence. And I always remember reading Vicki Reynolds' article on resisting burnout, because I think that to me just was so important to hold her ideas as well around the work we were doing with people was not what was causing us such high levels of distress. It was the systems that we were trying to work in that were so just damaging in what they were doing. Yeah.
I'm conscious of the time, and Michelle has magically appeared on the right of my screen at the top. But could I ask just one last thing?
Yeah, you're fine. I'm just here to remind you that you are getting close. You're doing great with your timekeeping.
Thank you. So if there was something you'd like to leave us with Patrina, maybe an image, a phrase, a word, or something, what would it be?
All right, so there's a little bit of a story for this. So part of what we're able to do in our work was occasionally we were able to take people outside of detention without any guards or security or any other immigration workers, and give them the ability to just be outside of that, often in nature. So we'd go to the beaches, or we'd go to some forest or do a walk or something like that. And when you think about how that's influenced by narrative, is this idea that they were actually able to physically step into their preferred identity, to be a person again who is able to experience things that they can choose in some limits. And so often that was a really, really powerful experience for people to do that. It just reconnected to them and grounded them and did all this amazing stuff. And I remember so many times they would say to me, as we're driving out of detention or as we're sitting on a beach or something like that, they're going, I can breathe again. And so I guess I really hold that in mind in terms of not only for them, but the work that we did. And for me as a worker, to have been able to use narrative ideas in a context that was so rigid and so inflexible and all these other things, that when I would touch base back to these narrative ideas, it gave me the sense that I could breathe again as well, and I could kind of sit and do this work. So it's kind of this idea of, you know, sitting on a beach and just taking this nice big deep breath. Yeah.
Oh. That works perfectly for Australians. We like that, sitting. It's a beautiful image. It's a beautiful image. And Patrina also made a film some time back. So contact her about that. Thanks so much for talking with us, Patrina. Really appreciate it very much, joining us today. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for inviting me in. I love sharing these ideas with you, these stories. So it's such an honour to be able to do this with an audience. Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patrina, and also to you, Stephen, for sharing these amazing stories. I'm so moved by your witness to agency and integrity and dignity, and to Stephen and Ian for the questions. And I love finishing on that note of narrative helping us to keep breathing. So thank you so much. And we're going to move from Australia now to Singapore. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.